My name is Grace. I am 27 years old, and I learned the hard way that family can hurt you worse than any illness. I realized that the moment my own sister wrapped her fingers around my IV line and smiled like she was just fixing a loose thread on my shirt. Relax, she whispered, leaning over my hospital bed. You're being dramatic, as always. The monitor beeped next to me, my arm bruised from days of infusion, but she did not care. She pulled. Pain shot up my arm, warm blood rushed down my wrist, and the alarm exploded into the room. I tried to scream, but my voice came out as a broken gasp. My mother was at the foot of the bed. She saw everything. She saw the blood, the line ripped from my skin, the wild look on my sister's face. She opened her mouth, then shut it again, clutching her phone instead of my hand. Say you did it yourself, my sister hissed, pushing a wad of tissue into my palm as if she was helping. You're always clumsy, they'll believe that. I looked from her to my mother, begging with my eyes for someone, anyone, to defend me. My mother just stared at the floor. My heart pounded louder than the alarm. Then the door slammed open. A nurse stood there, eyes cold, taking in the bloody sheets, the dangling tube, my sister's frozen hand. And in that moment I realized this was not over, not by a long shot. Have you ever been betrayed by the one person who was supposed to protect you, while everyone else stayed silent and watched? Keep listening, because what that nurse said next changed everything for my family. The memory of that ripped IV didn't fade, it just changed shape. Months later, my phone lit up with a name I had started to hate seeing. Mom. I stared at the screen until it almost stopped ringing. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, pretend I never saw it. Part of me saw again the blood on my wrist, my sister's hand on the line, my mother's eyes glued to the floor. I answered anyway. We need to talk, my mom said, voice tight. Meet me at the park near your apartment, please. Meet you? After you watched her hurt me and said nothing? I almost said it out loud. Instead, I heard myself reply, Fine, 30 minutes. At the park, I sat on the bench, fingers clenched around my phone. On the screen was an unopened email from the hospital investigator, the one the nurse had called that night. Evidence attached, it said. Camera logs, incident report, witness statement. My sister thought she got away with it because Mom stayed silent. She had no idea I had something stronger than her lies now. Grace. I looked up. My mom stood there, smaller than I remembered, twisting her purse strap. You look better, she said. Recovered. Physically, I answered. Not from you, not from her. She sat down, leaving a careful distance between us. Your sister is coming too. I thought, we should all talk. Of course. This wasn't about me. This was about controlling the damage. You mean you want me to shut up before the hospital calls you? I asked quietly. She flinched. It was a misunderstanding, she whispered. She didn't mean to hurt you like that. You know how she is. No, Mom, I cut in. I know exactly how she is. Footsteps clicked on the path behind us. That familiar perfume hit me before I saw her. My sister slid onto the bench like she owned the whole park. Sunglasses, perfect hair, that same bored expression she wore while my blood was soaking the sheets. Wow, dramatic meeting spot, she said. What is this? An intervention? You ripped my IV out, I said. My voice was calm, almost flat. Don't shake, don't cry, make her sweat. She shrugged. It slipped. You jerked. You always make things bigger than they are. There's a report, I replied. The nurse saw everything. There are cameras in the hallway. I didn't make anything. My mom sucked in a breath. My sister's smile twitched, then snapped back into place. So what? You're going to ruin my life over a little accident? She scoffed. In my head, I saw two paths, One where I backed down like I always had, swallowing the anger until it turned into guilt, and one where I stopped protecting the person who had almost killed me just because we shared blood. "I'm going to tell the truth," I said, "to the hospital, to anyone who asks. And if they decide your accident is assault, that's on you." For the first time, she looked unsettled. "Mom." She turned, expecting backup. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again, eyes moving between us. The same silence from the hospital room stretched between us like a noose. And I realized something bitter and sharp. Silence wasn't neutral. It had always been a choice. Do you think a parent's silence when you're being hurt is just fear? Or is it the same as helping the person who's hurting you? Keep listening, because this was only the beginning of making them all face what they did. Silence sat between us like a fourth person on that bench. My sister kept her eyes on Mom, waiting for the same old defense. "Say something," she snapped. "Tell her this is ridiculous." Mom's fingers dug into her purse strap. "Girls, this is getting out of hand," she whispered. "We're in public." "Good," I said. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out steady. Maybe that's the only place the truth ever had a chance. Samantha rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, Grace, you're acting like I tried to murder you." Flash cut. White ceiling. Alarm screaming. My wrist burning. My dad frozen in the corner. Eyes on the wall instead of me. Back to the park. My sister's bored face. "You nearly tore a line out of my vein while I was weak and drugged," I answered. "You did it on purpose because you were angry they were paying attention to me and not you. That's not a little accident." Her jaw tightened. "You can't prove what I was thinking," she said. "You can't prove anything." This was the moment I'd been waiting for. "Actually," I replied, sliding my phone into my bag, "I can. And I didn't come here alone." She frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I glanced past her shoulder. "She's here." Samantha turned just as footsteps stopped behind us. "Grace," a calm, familiar voice said. I looked up. The nurse from that night, hair pulled back, badge clipped to her shirt, eyes sharper than I remembered, stood there, watching all three of us. Jessica. She hadn't changed her mind. She'd answered my email the same day I sent it, weeks ago, when I finally gathered the courage to write. "I'm the patient from room 412, the night my IV was ripped out. You said you saw what happened. Will you still say it?" Now she was here, exactly when I needed her. Mom's face drained of color. You invited her?" she whispered. I nodded. "I told you we needed to talk, Mom. I never said it would be just us." Samantha barked out a laugh, too loud, too fake. "Wow, you're really doing this? Bringing strangers into our family business?" "It stopped being just family business when you put your hands on medical equipment and hurt a patient," Jessica said, her voice cool and professional. "And for the record, I'm not a stranger. I was the nurse assigned to Grace that night." Samantha's eyes narrowed. "You don't know what you saw. You came in after it happened." Flash cut. The door slamming open, Jessica's face appearing over me, my sister's hand frozen in midair, the tube hanging loose, blood already on the sheets. Back to the park. Jessica shaking her head slowly. "No," she said. "I watched you wrap your hand around that IV line. I watched you argue with Grace, telling her she was being dramatic. I saw you yank it. And I saw your father watching from the corner, saying nothing." The air left my lungs. Hearing someone else say it out loud, like a scene from a report, made my chest tighten. Mom squeezed her eyes shut. "Please," she whispered. "Can we not do this here?" "Where else, Mom?" I asked. "At home? Where everything gets swept under the rug? In another hospital room? If she decides to lose her temper again?" Samantha stood up so fast the bench shook. "You're lying." She snapped at Jessica. You're both lying. You hate me because I asked questions about your precious protocols. You wanted to get me in trouble. Jessica didn't even flinch. The footage from the visitor's camera outside your sister's room backs up everything I saw, she replied. The hospital already has it. I was asked to give a statement. That's why I wanted to talk to you, Grace. To make sure you were safe, and to ask if you wanted to file a formal complaint. My sister's bravado cracked for the first time. Camera? She whispered. There were cameras? This is a hospital in 2025, Jessica said. There are always cameras. I watched the realization sink in, watched the color drain from her face the way it had drained from mine when the needle left my arm. For once, I wasn't the one shrinking. You'll ruin my job, Samantha hissed at me. You know my boss asks about character issues. If they find out. Then maybe you shouldn't have done something worth finding out about, I cut in. My hands were shaking now, but not from fear, from adrenaline, from power. This is what consequences look like, Sam. You chose to hurt me. You chose to lie. I'm choosing to stop covering for you. Mom looked between us, eyes full of tears that never fell. Grace, she's your sister, she pleaded. We can fix this without involving anyone else. Think about what this will do to her future. Flash cut. My hand clamped over my bleeding arm, the taste of metal in my mouth, my dad's voice saying, Just let it go, Grace. She didn't mean it. While I lay there shaking. Back to the park. I did think about her future, I said quietly. For years. Every time I let something slide so she wouldn't get in trouble. And all it taught her was that she could keep hurting people, and Mom and Dad would just look away. I turned to Jessica. What happens next? She glanced at Samantha, then at Mom. That depends on whether Grace wants to move forward, she said. The hospital has opened an internal review. If she confirms my statement, there could be legal consequences. At minimum, your actions will be on record. Samantha's confident mask shattered. You can't do this to me, she said, voice shaking. We're family. You did this to yourself, I answered. Family doesn't mean I'm your shield forever. I held Jessica's gaze and nodded once. I'm ready to confirm everything. Jessica gave a small, firm nod back. In that moment, it wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about finally making the truth louder than their silence. How would you feel if the one witness who saw everything suddenly showed up and blew apart the lie your family has been hiding for years? Keep listening, because this was the first time my sister realized her actions might actually cost her something. Jessica's words felt like a gavel coming down. For the first time since the hospital, the power in the conversation shifted. My sister's confidence drained out of her face, and my mother's composure cracked. I watched both of them, almost from a distance, like I was finally standing outside the warped little stage we had all been performing on for years. Mom started grasping for a way out, mumbling about how this could still be handled within the family, as if what happened in that hospital room had been a minor disagreement at the dinner table. She talked about fear, about being overwhelmed, about how Dad had told her they'd sort it out at home. The same excuses, rewrapped in shakier paper. Samantha clung to the word mistake like it was a life raft. In her version, she had lost her temper for a second, touched something she shouldn't have, but it was all being blown out of proportion. She kept circling back to what this would do to her job, her reputation, her future, as if the worst part of that night had been the potential consequences, not my blood on the sheets. Jessica didn't let any of it slide. In a calm, clinical way, she reminded them that once a staff member reports possible assault on a patient, it stops being a private matter. The hospital had procedures, reviews, obligations. What happened was documented. My injuries, the alarms, her witness statement, the camera logs. They could no longer call this a misunderstanding and bury it in the family attic. For the first time, Mom turned to me not as the inconvenience who kept bringing it up, but as the person everything now depended on. She wanted to know what I wanted. Not what I was willing to let go of. Not how much I would sacrifice to keep Samantha safe. What I wanted. The answer was surprisingly clear in my mind. I wanted the truth to exist somewhere official, somewhere they couldn't edit or gaslight later. I wanted my statement on record, matching Jessica's report, lining up with the cameras that had silently watched what my parents pretended not to see. And I wanted someone neutral to drag all of us into a room and force this family to look at itself without makeup or filters. Not over a meal, not in some manipulated heart-to-heart where I'd be told I was too sensitive. Real therapy, real names for what they had done. When I laid it out, I could almost feel Samantha calculating, weighing her options behind gritted teeth. Therapy sounded humiliating to her, but the words legal consequences terrified her more. Jessica quietly added that taking responsibility and seeking help might work in Samantha's favor with review boards, or even a judge if things escalated. It was the first time I'd seen my mother look at my sister like a liability instead of a prize. Eventually, Mom sagged under the weight of reality. She agreed to therapy in a strained, reluctant way, not because she suddenly understood my pain, but because she was desperate to limit the damage. The request beneath her words was obvious. If they played along in therapy, if Samantha performed remorse well enough, would I consider softening when the hospital asked how far I wanted to push this? The old version of me would have rushed to reassure her. I didn't. I told her I would consider it, but I would not promise to protect Samantha from consequences before the process had even begun. What happened to me was not a minor bargaining chip. Jessica checked the time and reminded me about the formal statement I'd be asked to give. She told me I had the right to bring support, to understand the process, not to be pressured into silence. It was strange hearing someone talk about my experience like it mattered on paper, in reports, in systems that usually forget people like me exist. When Jessica left, the three of us were left sitting in the ruins of our old dynamic. The park was still full of normal life noises, kids shouting, dogs barking, cars passing, and yet it felt like the ground under our bench had been cut open. I stood and made it clear that if they were serious about therapy, it would be with a real professional, not a biased friend, not someone they could manipulate. Mom could send me the name, and I would decide if I agreed. Until then, I didn't want calls begging me to protect Samantha or to manage their guilt. Walking away, I felt their eyes on my back, heavy and confused. Samantha's shock was almost palpable. She had always counted on me folding at the last minute, not this time. This hadn't satisfied any desire for revenge yet. If anything, it had sharpened it into something colder and more controlled. Agreeing to therapy wasn't peace. It was the opening move in a longer, uglier war that would take place in waiting rooms, on legal forms, in sessions where every lie would be challenged out loud. If someone in your family only agrees to change because they are terrified of being exposed and punished, would you accept that and ease up? Or would you keep pushing until they finally feel even a fraction of the fear and helplessness they once forced on you? Keep listening, because those therapy sessions did not heal us right away. They ripped open wounds my family had been hiding for years. Therapy started as an email in my inbox. No big moment, no violins, just a subject line from my mother forwarded from some clinic. Family intake, appointment confirmation. There were 3 names in the body of the email besides the therapist's. Mine, my mother's, my sister's. My father's name was missing. He had stayed in the background since the hospital, like a shadow that refused to attach to anything solid. At the park, Mom had mentioned him only as a past tense excuse. He said we'd sort it out at home. Now, as I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, I realized he hadn't actually spoken to me once since the IV was ripped out. The appointment was scheduled for a Thursday evening, the only time all of us were available. I stared at the time slot for a long minute. Part of me wanted to cancel it, to tell Jessica I'd changed my mind and let the hospital process roll on without the illusion of healing. Another part, darker and quieter, saw it as a useful stage, a contained environment where my family's version of events could be pinned down, recorded, challenged. Not just in hospital files, but in front of each other. I opened my notes app and started typing, almost without thinking. It looked like a diary entry, but I titled it as if it were an email. To whoever ends up sitting in that chair across from us, you're going to see 3 people who look like they belong in a health insurance brochure. We dress well. We smile automatically. We know how to talk around things. My mother will say, "It all escalated so quickly." My sister will say, "It was a mistake." They will both look at me to see how much I plan to expose. Here's what you won't see unless I say it. You won't see the years before the IV, where my feelings were background noise to my sister's drama. You won't see the night my arm was bleeding and my father told me, in a tone he usually reserved for traffic reports, to let it go because she was stressed. You won't see the way my mother's silence hurt more than the physical pain. I need you to understand that what happened with the IV wasn't a freak out-of-character explosion. It was the most honest moment my family has ever had. The mask slipped. I saw exactly where I ranked. And now I'm walking into your office with a choice. Force them to look at that moment under bright lights, or let them repaint it as an accident until even I start doubting it again. If I seem cold, it's because I'm tired of bleeding for people who never even admitted they were holding the knife. I read it over, fingers hovering above the keyboard. It was angry, yes, but also clear in a way my spoken words never felt. I saved it, not sure if I'd ever show it to the therapist, but relieved to have it stored somewhere outside my head. 2 days before the session, my phone buzzed with a number I recognized, but had mentally placed in a different lifetime. Dad. The preview showed only the first line. "We need to talk before Thursday." For a moment, I considered deleting it unopened. He had made his choice in that hospital room. Watching, not interfering. Letting his wife and favorite daughter decide what reality would be. Curiosity won. I opened the message. It was longer than anything he'd sent me in years. "Your mother told me about the nurse and the report. The hospital called me this week. They said they have my statement on file from that night and asked if I wanted to add anything. You know what I told them." I said I didn't see exactly what happened, just that there was a lot of shouting and commotion, and then suddenly your IV was out. I stuck to it. "I didn't put anything on record that could ruin your sister's career. I'm texting you because I know you're hurting and angry. I know you feel betrayed. But you don't understand what this could do if you push it. Her job, our reputation, possible legal problems. We're not those kinds of people, Grace. We don't belong in courtrooms or on disciplinary lists. You have the power to make this bigger or smaller. I'm asking you, as your father, to think about the family as a whole before you decide what to say." I read it twice. The words blurred together into one long plea that never once acknowledged the main fact. His daughter had been hurt in a hospital bed, and he had chosen the comfort of the aggressor over the safety of the victim. I scrolled down. There was more. "I'm not saying you're lying. I'm saying memory is tricky when you're sick and in pain. You might have interpreted things worse than they were, and now this nurse is filling your head. She was clearly biased against your sister from the start. If you go into that therapy room and the hospital interview with guns blazing, it will force me to pick a side in a very public way. I don't want to do that. I want to keep the family intact. Please don't make me regret trusting you to handle this quietly." There it was. The threat, dressed up as concern. Not, "Please don't drag this out because it hurts you," but, "Please don't make me pick a side where people can see it." My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't reply. Instead, I scrolled up again, rereading the line about his statement. I said I didn't see exactly what happened. I remembered the angle he had been standing at in the hospital room, his body framed by the doorway, his eyes moving between the monitor, my sister's clenched jaw, and my arm. There was no question of whether he had seen it. The nurse had. The camera had. My mother had. He had simply decided that what he saw wasn't something he wanted to admit. On impulse, I forwarded his message to myself and saved it in the same folder as my therapist letter. A digital record of his priorities, straight from his own phone. That night, I lay awake imagining the first therapy session. I pictured my mother talking about communication issues and family tension, carefully avoiding the word abuse. I pictured my sister minimizing, crying strategically, spinning the story into a tale of a misunderstood moment. And then I pictured myself sliding my phone across the coffee table to the therapist, letting them read my father's text. Not just what my family had done, but how they were actively working to manage the narrative now. The thought didn't comfort me exactly, but it gave me a strange sense of leverage. For years, they'd kept everything in the dark where they could rearrange it as needed. Now, very slowly, evidence was piling up in places they couldn't easily reach. Hospital logs, nurse statements, email threads, my own written words, my father's clumsy attempts at damage control. Revenge in my mind had stopped being a dramatic confrontation where someone screamed and stormed out. It was becoming something else, a methodical refusal to lie for them, a collection of truths laid out in plain sight until their version of family couldn't stand on its own weight. The day of the first session, I dressed simply and arrived 10 minutes early. The waiting room smelled like coffee and old magazines. Couples and individuals sat hunched over their phones, each lost in their own private wars. I checked in, then opened my notes app one more time. Under my fake letter to the therapist, I added a final line. "I'm not here to make them like me," I typed. "I'm here to make sure, for once, that every person in this room hears exactly what happened and what it cost me. Whether they do anything with that truth is on them. Whether I finally stop bleeding for them is on me." When my mother and sister walked in, faces set, I closed my phone and slid it into my bag. The therapist opened the door and called our names. We stood. Whatever happened in that room, I knew one thing. I was not walking in empty-handed anymore. The therapist's office looked too soft for what I brought into it. Warm lamps, pale walls, a plant in the corner. It felt like a place for couples arguing about chores, not a family that had turned a hospital bed into a battlefield. Dr. Harris introduced herself, explained confidentiality and ground rules, then kept circling one word: safety. Physical safety, emotional safety, the basic belief that the people who love you won't use your weakest moment against you. I sat there thinking about my IV line, my sister's hand, my parents standing 3 feet away, and knew we had already failed that test. She asked why we were there. My mother went first. She called it a serious situation that got out of hand and wrapped everything in soft padding. Stress, panic, miscommunication. We were there, she said, to rebuild trust. Like trust had simply slipped, not been ripped out. My sister followed. One mistake, in a tense moment. She talked about her workload, pressure, burnout, her career, how unfair it was that a single incident might ruin her future. If you believed her, the main victim in that hospital room had been her reputation. When it was my turn, my throat tried to fall into the old script. It wasn't that bad. I know she didn't mean it. I just want peace. Instead, I thought about the note on my phone and forced myself to stay with the truth. I told Dr. Harris that lying in that hospital bed showed me exactly where I ranked in my own family. My body was attached to a line someone grabbed in anger while the people who should have protected me watched and chose silence. I didn't dwell on blood or alarms. I described the moment I understood that my safety ranked below my sister's image and my parents' comfort. Dr. Harris listened, then quietly rearranged the chairs, one in the middle, two opposite. She called it role reversal. Whoever sat alone would retell the hospital night from someone else's perspective. My mother went first, speaking as if she were me. For a few sentences she managed, weak, scared, needing someone to step in. Then she slid straight back into her own fear, how overwhelmed she'd been, how frozen she'd felt. Dr. Harris kept steering her back. Stay in Grace's body, in Grace's fear. Watching my mother fight that simple instruction explained why she had been useless when it mattered. Then my sister took the middle chair. She complained the exercise was biased, that it made her the villain. Dr. Harris didn't argue. She just pointed out that refusing to imagine the victim's experience said enough on its own. Eventually, my sister tried. The performance edge dropped from her voice as she described lying in a thin gown, someone's hand on the line feeding into your vein, knowing they controlled whether it stayed in or ripped out. For a brief moment, I saw it land. She knew exactly how much power she'd had over me, even if she still wouldn't name what she'd done with it. Last, Dr. Harris asked me to speak as my sister. I stepped into the version of her I'd known for years, the one who assumed attention by default. I described walking into a room where my illness had stolen the spotlight, feeling pushed to the margins, and reaching for the IV not from ignorance, but from a twisted need to shut the scene down. The panic, I said, didn't come until after the blood and the alarm, when the price tag on that impulse finally appeared. When I finished, Dr. Harris let the silence stretch, then said calmly that families can have messy histories, but some acts cross a line no stress can excuse. Using an IV line that way sounded like one of those lines. For the first time, someone outside the hospital put it in concrete terms. She talked about professional codes, mandatory reports, how a documented incident might look to a licensing board or even law enforcement. Not threats, just reality. My sister shifted. My mother's hands locked together in her lap. Dr. Harris asked if anything else was shaping how we handled this. I told her about my father's text, how he'd told the hospital he hadn't really seen what happened, then warned me not to drag our name into hearings because we're not those kinds of people. The pattern hadn't stopped in the hospital room. It continued in messages asking me to protect the person who hurt me. We left without a real apology. There were soft phrases about never meaning harm, about everything getting out of control, but no one said, "I did this, and it was wrong." What changed was the ground under us. There was now a professional who refused to rename what happened, and a fresh record of how each of us told the story when someone neutral could hear. On the drive home, my mother talked about scheduling, my sister stared out the window, and I sat in the back seat realizing my revenge wasn't about screaming until they broke. It was about calmly refusing to lie for them, session after session, until the truth they buried started appearing in places they couldn't erase. Dad walked into Dr. Harris's office like nothing was really wrong, just another family issue he could manage. Dr. Harris already knew his two versions of that night. The hospital statement where he hadn't clearly seen what happened, and the text begging me not to push things so far he'd have to pick a side in public. She didn't argue with him. She simply asked him to describe the room, not his feelings, the layout, where he stood, where the bed was, the IV pole, my sister, my arm. He answered in that calm tone he used at work. Doorway, end of bed, monitor on one side, IV on the other. Samantha at the IV side, leaning over me, her hand near the line. Dr. Harris let the picture build and then asked, very quietly, "From where you were standing, could you see her hand on the tubing before the IV came out?" A pause. Then, yes. No speech, no breakdown. Just one small word that shattered a year of "I don't remember clearly," and "maybe you misinterpreted it." He had seen enough to know what she was doing, and later, when the hospital asked, he chose to blur that to protect her and the family name, not me. He tried to wrap the admission in excuses, shock, confusion, assumptions, but Dr. Harris didn't let him retreat. She named his choice for what it was. Not neutrality, but alignment with the person causing harm. When the session ended, we filed out in silence. Outside, in the hallway, two uniformed officers and a man in a blazer with a hospital badge were waiting. The investigator stood. "Ms. Collins? Mr. Collins?" he said. "We're here to follow up on the incident report. The hospital has requested formal statements." My father went pale. He touched my elbow, voice low. "You don't have to do this. We can still keep it in the family." I stepped out of reach. "You already chose the family you wanted to protect," I said. "Now I'm protecting myself." In a small conference room, Jessica sat beside me while I gave my statement. She gave hers. The investigator compared our words to footage and nursing notes. My parents and my sister were interviewed separately. No theatrics, just questions, answers, signatures. For the first time, the story existed somewhere my family couldn't edit. There was no dramatic arrest. The outcome was paper and process. A report to the licensing board, a note in my sister's file about an incident with a vulnerable patient, documented by staff and corroborated by the patient. Over the next months, fallout crept in quietly. A promotion vanished. A job application stalled. Her supervisor mentioned concerns. For once, doors were closing on her, not on me. Meanwhile, I built a life that didn't orbit their denial. I moved to another city, found work where no one compared me to my sister, made friends who believed me the first time. My family became something distant and limited, brief visits, messages I answered only when it didn't cost me too much. When people ask if I regret pushing it, I think about that hospital bed, my sister's fingers on the line, my parents standing still, my father later pretending he hadn't really seen. They would have let me carry all of it forever if I'd stayed quiet. Telling the truth didn't break a healthy family, it exposed a broken one. So I'll leave you with this. If your sister ripped out your IV in a hospital and your parents begged you to protect her future by staying quiet, what would you choose? Comfortable silence that keeps you bleeding on the inside, or the hard, lonely truth that finally lets the consequences land where they belong?